Hi, I'm Olivia Race, and this is Dale Remsberg, and we're members of the AMGA instructor team.
We're going to talk about racking up. I'm going sport climbing, so it's pretty simple. There's just a few things to consider here. There's a couple of ways to rack your quick draws on your harness. Just comes down to personal preference. I'm an outie clipper, so I clip with my gates facing out, but a lot of people like to have it clipped inward, so they're innie clippers. So just experiment with it and practice with what works well for you. Some people find that comes off quickly and they can clip a bolt. Are most of the clips on the right side, the left side? Are you not sure? Maybe you're going to diversify and have equal amount of draws on each side. And then as you start working up the route, and say your left side gets empty because you've used all the left draws, and you find a good stance, you might move some of the draws over. I've got a belay device in case I need that for getting off the route. And I've got some basic anchor material if the anchor at the top needs an actual sling to build an anchor with, or I might just use my quick draws to use for the top anchor. Just depends. But just real simple racking for sport climbing.
And then for trad climbing, we have more gear, so it's going to get a little bit more complex. I'm also an outie clipper. I like to clip out. With the cams, it's going to depend on the climb that you're on. Like Dale said, if it's more on the left or more on the right. If I'm in a corner where I'm going to have my right hip against the corner the whole time, I won't have access to this side as easily, so I might change my system up. But generally speaking, the system that I use and like is I like to have most of my cams and my quick draws on my front gear loops. And I save my back gear loops for anchor material, maybe a jacket if I'm on a longer route, belay device, things that I'm going to use at the anchors. So on the front loops, I start in the back with my quick draws. I rack those one on top of the other. And what that does is it saves me some space since I am racking most of the gear on these front loops. And then I work from big to small. So the smaller gear is on the front of my harness. And the reason for that is if I'm placing smaller gear, it usually is harder climbing. So I want to have easier access to that gear. I have larger cams on the right side usually, and somewhere in the 0.75, 0.5 range usually I shift over and then have smaller cams and nuts on my left side. And then for the stoppers, I like to split those between two carabiners in case maybe I drop one of these. I haven't lost my entire set of stoppers. And I also have big on one carabiner, small on the other. So if I'm looking at a small crack, I know I can pull this carabiner off and choose an appropriately sized nut to place in the crack. One other thing that's nice when you're racking gear anywhere is to have these key lock carabiners, which have there isn't a hook on the inside of the carabiner. And that just makes it easier to get these on and off your harness, on and off the anchor. It makes your life a lot easier, especially when you're working with weighted ropes. Similar to the way I rack my draws, one on top of the other, if I have doubles of a certain size in the cams, I'll also rack those one on top of the other. And that just saves me space on the harness. I'll also separate if I have sport style draws and alpine style draws, so I know I can pull whichever one I might want off at any given time. Some people like to rack the gear on the sling, or some routes might make it so we want to have some of that gear on the sling. If you have one of these corners where you're not going to have access to one side of your body, we might take that gear and rack it on a sling. It can be hard to fit much more than a double rack on your harness as well. So maybe if we have a bigger rack, we might consider a sling.
When I go trad climbing, I do it a little different than Olivia. I actually go back and forth from side to side with my sizes. That way, if I see a crack size and I think it's a 1-inch piece and I reach down and it doesn't have the exact piece, I have a good chance of finding a similar size that might fit in a nearby pod in that crack. So when I rack, I start on one side of my rack and then just work out through the sizes from side to side. So I started with a small size here, and then I went to the next size up here, and then back over to the next size up over here, and vice versa, back and forth.
So there's lots of different ways to rack up. And the main thing is having a system that works for you, that you're familiar with. And then if you go to place a piece and it doesn't fit, that never happens to you, does it?
No.
If you go to place a piece and it's the wrong piece and you're going to put it back on your harness, put it back where it belongs, in your given system. Because then when you go to find it the next time, it will be where you expect it.
Yeah, that's a good point.